Hello, fifth graders. Today we're going to read a little bit more of Out of the Dust by Karen Hesse. Before we read, I always like to say we are reading with permission from Scholastic. They let me read this to you guys and put it up so you can watch me read at home. So thank you to them. So last time we had finished reading, we were in August of 1934 with our main character, Billy Joe. And Billy Joe just experienced a really big fire at our house, and we found out that her mom got really, really badly burned, ended up having the baby, but then both her and the baby did die. So now, in her family, it seems to only be Billy Joe and her dad. So let's see how they are gonna adapt to that new style of living, because that's a big difference for them. So this first poem is Roots. President Roosevelt tells us to plant trees. Trees will break the wind. He says trees will end the drought. The animals can take shelter there. Children can take shelter. Trees have roots, he says. They hold onto the ground. That's good advice, but I'm not sure he understands the problem. Trees have never been at home here. They're just not meant to be here. Maybe none of us are meant to be here. Only the prairie grass and the hawks. My father will stay, no matter what. He's as stubborn as sod. He and the land have a hold on each other. But what about me? August 1934. The empty spaces. I don't know my father anymore. He sits across from me. He looks like my father. He chews his food like my father. He brushes his dusty hair back like my father. But he is a stranger. I am awkward with him and irritated, and I want to be alone. But I am terrified of being alone. We are both changing. We are shifting to fill in the empty spaces left by Ma. I keep my raw and stinging hands behind my back when he comes near, because he stares when he sees them. September 1934. See, too, we just read that Billy Joe, whenever her dad comes, remember her hands are really badly burned, and so she actually doesn't like to show her father her hands, so she puts them like right behind her back. So not only he's staring at them, so I might be a good reader and just predict or interpret that means maybe that Billy Joe's burned up hands remind her father that, he lost his wife and his son because of this fire. So it's probably not a good thing for him to remember. Probably makes him really sad. Okay. The hole. The heat from the cook stove hurts my burns, and the salt, the water, and the dust hurts too. I spend all my time in pain, and my father spends his time out the side of the house digging a hole 40 feet by 60 feet, 6 feet deep. I think he's digging the pond to feed off the windmill, the one Ma wanted, but he doesn't say. He just digs. He sends me to the train yard to gather boards that once were boxcars, but now are junk. I bring them back, careful of the scabs and the raw sores on my bare hands. I don't know what he needs boards for. He doesn't tell me. But when he's not in the hole digging, he works on the windmill, replacing the parts that keep it from turning. People stop by and watch. They think my father is crazy, digging such a big hole. And I think he's crazy too. The water will seep back into the earth. It'll never stay put in any old pond. But my father has thought through all that, and he's digging anyway. I think to talk to Ma about it, and then I remember. I can almost forgive him the taking of Ma's money. I can almost forgive him his night in Guman getting drunk. But as long as I live, no matter how big a hole he digs, I can't forgive him that pail of kerosene left by the stove on the side. September 1934. So remember last time we read, we had, I think, a bunch of women were talking about how, they weren't really talking about how Billy Joe's father left that pail of kerosene by the stove. They just kept talking about how Billy Joe was the one who threw it on her mother because she thought it was water to try to get the fire out. So again, it almost seems like they're playing that blame game a little bit. They're not really sure who is to blame in this, which it was an accident. So, Kailua. A volcano erupted in Hawaii. Kailua. It threw huge chunks into the air, the ground shook, and smoke choked everything in its path. Sounds a little like a dust storm. September 1934. Boxes. In my closet are 2 boxes, the gatherings of my life. Papers, school drawings, a broken hairpin, a dress from my baby days, the first lock of hair, a tiny basket woven from prairie grass, a doll with a china head, a pink ball, 3 dozen marbles, a fan from Baxter's funeral home, my baby teeth in a glass jar, a torn map of the world, 2 candy wrappers, 1,000 things I haven't looked at in years. I kept promising to go through the boxes with Ma and get rid of what I didn't need, but I never got to do it, and now my hands hurt, and I haven't got the heart. September 1934. Night bloomer. Mrs. Brown's cereus plant bloomed on Saturday night. She sent word after promising I would come see it. I rubbed my gritty eyes with swollen hands. My stomach grizzled as I made my way through the dark to her house. Ma wouldn't have let me go at all. My father just stood in the doorway and watched me leave. It was almost 3 in the morning when I got there. A small crowd stood around. Mrs. Brown said, "The blossom opened at midnight, big as a dinner plate. It took only moments to unfold. How can such a flower find a way to bloom in this drought, in this wind? It blossomed at night, when the sun couldn't scorch it, when the wind was quiet, when there might have been a sip of dew to freshen it. I couldn't watch at dawn, when the flower, touched by the first finger of morning light, wilted and died. I couldn't watch as the tender petals burned up in the sun." September 1934. The Path of Sorrow. Miss Freeland said, "During the Great War, we fed the world. We couldn't grow enough wheat to fill all the bellies. The price the world paid for our wheat was so high, it swelled our wallets and our heads. And we bought bigger tractors, more acres, until we had mortgages and rent and bills beyond reason. But we all felt so useful we didn't notice. Then the war ended, and before long, Europe didn't need our wheat anymore. They could grow their own. But we needed Europe's money to pay our mortgage, our rent, our bills. We squeezed more cattle, more sheep, onto less land, and they grazed down the settle till they reached root. And the price of wheat kept dropping. So we had to grow more bushels to make the same amount of money we had made before, to pay for all the equipment, all that land, and the more sod we plowed up, the drier things got. Because the water that used to collect there, under the grass, biding its time, keeping things alive through the dry spells, wasn't there anymore. Without the sod, the water vanished, and the soil turned to dust, until the wind took it, lifting it up, carrying it away. Such a sorrow doesn't come suddenly. There are 1,000 steps to take before you get out there. But now, sorrow climbs up our front steps, big as Texas, and we didn't even see it coming, even though it's been making its way straight to us all along. September 1934. Okay, I'm going to stop us there for today because our next section, we're now another season, we're now in autumn 1934. So that was a pretty big little section. We learned a little bit about, I remember I said we're coming up on just the focal point of the book, the real turnaround. So now we're going to see, before we had life with Ma, and now we have to see Billy Joe's life without her mom and see how she adapts to that. And already it seems, her mom was the one that was always home while her dad was out in the fields. So now you can predict as a reader that it might be a little bit different now that her ma isn't around and now that it's just her and her dad. So we'll start that next time and start with autumn 1934. Okay, thanks for reading, guys.